They also go live so others can enjoy and participate. Not all of us are able to join live. Fantastic. Okay, so for those that are live, I have put the copy of the resource document in the Zoom chat. It's a benefit of showing up live is that you get to participate in all the activities and go through and get access to the Google Doc and all of that jazz. As I said, we'll wait a moment or two, give folks a little bit of time to land here and join in the space. For those that are here live, if you want to share in the chat is not made public, where you're calling in from and just generally how you're doing. Hopefully everyone is doing well. It was massive rain here yesterday, and now it is like so brightly sunny. I have to shut all of my shades to not be blinded by all the things. But okay, excellent. Let's get started. So wonderful to be with you all, and I'm fighting my computer, so apologies that this is a little bit smaller. I will keep working on it as we go forward, but in the last 20 minutes wasn't able to do it. I sit there and I'm like, we do these all the time. We've lived in virtual land for so many years now. Why is it that sometimes things go wonky right at the last minute? But they do, and we just roll with it and all of the different things. So welcome to this month's free data strategy share out by DataSpire. This month, we're talking about beyond just bar charts. How can we help our students make smarter visualization choices? How can we sort of help with this aspect of them making graphs so that we can up level their graphs so we don't just always see bar charts coming out of our students. We're going to think about expanding sort of how we visualize data and thinking about graph choice as a skill and what that means for our learners and how we can bring that into our classrooms. So I am Kristen. I encourage those of you that are here live to, if you would like, change your Zoom name to your first name and pronouns. We will be sort of connecting and working together, those of us that are here live. For those that have been able to join us synchronously, I just want to encourage us to participate fully, openly. This is your hour to ask questions, dive in, think about what this means for your classroom, for your students, get some answers to whatever questions that you have, and go along with the activities that I have planned out to share. For those that are watching the recording, great, reach out. We're happy to answer your questions as well. And next month, join us live. It's much more fun. For those of us that are here, we're going to participate so that we can get the most out of the hour and that everybody else can get the most out of their hour as we are together. And part of that is speaking from our I statements of things that we've noticed rather than making general vast statements about all students, things like that. And we all decided to be here, so we've got some similarities, but we all work in really different places and different components. So just sort of remembering that. So we're here. October is all about visualizing data. How can we think about we're visualizing data and helping our students? And so I just kind of want to sort of make an analogy or a connection from data, which can sometimes feel sort of esoteric and abstract, to something a little more concrete, which is something that has vastly taken over my life because I have 2 children playing competitive soccer this fall. So bear with me as I'm going to make a soccer analogy. So our graphs, and it's in quotes because encompassed in that is graph, charts, plots, maps, all of the different ways that we visualize our data, are to data what goals are to soccer. We can totally play soccer without scoring any goals. It gets really interesting, especially as you go higher up, if there aren't goals. But the point of soccer is actually to score goals across the 2 teams, and the team that gets the most goals wins. So we can absolutely work with data without visualizing it. But the whole point of working with data is to learn something from it and to be able to tell stories from it, identify claims from it, share with one another to make decisions based off of those data. And those of us that are visually able, we process data, we process information much faster in a visual form than we do in raw numbers, words, or images in our raw data. And so these graphs situate really strongly into how we actually engage with and do the work with making sense of data. And when we're out in the world, there are many different ways that we see data. So this is a choropleth map. It's each geographic region is colored. This has to do with snow. Bear with me. I don't think many of us don't yet have snow. It's still pretty early in October, but some of us will eventually be getting snow. I wish I had more snow in my backyard. So we see maps of data. We see line graphs of data across many different years. We see box plots of data with the medians and the range, the interquartile ranges, and we see the good old bar chart and the good old line chart, plus many, many more of different ways that we can look at our data. And these are all have to do with snow. And we've got lots of different ways that we can visualize information about snow or whatever phenomenon or topic area that we're looking at. But it sort of begs the question of how can we help our students determine which way we should be visualizing and looking at our data to get at that end point where we're trying to get them to of making meaning from the data and telling stories or making claims from the data. Not telling stories as in make-believe stories, but communicating out what they are seeing in the data, what information they want to share from those data. And all of that interpretation and reasoning and analysis and synthesis, it all trickles back to that visualization and what visualization we're using. So we're going to start with a kind of, okay, so how do we visualize our data and how does that come into play? And we're going to, I know it's fall and I could have thought of something with regards to pumpkins, but sometimes I'm a little like pumpkin spiced out at this point in the year. So I'm actually like launching us ahead into thinking about the spring and thinking about, okay, so when do cherry trees blossom? But so before we dive into the data, those of us that are here live and those that are watching the recording pause, think about it. So what's a prediction? When might cherry trees blossom? You can unmute, you can share in the chat. What are some of our thoughts as to when cherry trees blossom? Okay, nice. Okay, or in the spring sometime. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a like spring is a season. We also have a prediction of March, specifically the month of March. My sister lives in DC, so she's often telling me about when these cherry trees blossom and people come in. So I've got some data for us to look at to explore this question, and thanks for playing along. So what I'm going to ask that you do is take a look at the data. And first decide if you can use these data to answer this question, because that's a first important step of like, will these data actually help us explore this question? And maybe this is not the question that is top of mind for you, but thanks for playing along so that we can all have this shared experience. So look at the data, determine if you can use these data to answer the question. If the answer is yes, hopefully I've given us some data that we can use to explore this question. Then think about, okay, which aspects of the data would you use and what kind of graph would you make? Would you make a bar chart? The ones our students love. Would you make a line graph? Different things like that. And then I'm just going to ask you to make a quick sketch. So quick sketch. Let's say I'm looking at these data. I've decided we can use them. And I'm going to make a pie chart. So I'm going to like draw my circle and I'm going to sort of think about, well, we're going to have different wedges and I'll label the wedges. Now notice I have not like scaled any vaccines. I've not actually plotted any number value data or categorical data on this. I've just made a quick sketch of sort of generally what can I look at, okay? So quick sketch. So look at the data, decide if we can use it. If so, what data would you use? Like which variables or attributes? And what kind of graph would you make? And then make a quick sketch. So, sorry, spoiler, it's really helpful if you have a piece of scrap paper around to do this. Okay, so next step. So when do cherry trees blossom? This is also, if it's hard to see on the screen, it's also in the shared resource document. So you can jump in there and look at the data table here. But here's the data table. I'm going to go quiet, take about 1 to 2 minutes, look at these data, determine, Can we use these data to investigate the question, when do cherry trees blossom? If so, which variables or attributes would we use? And what kind of graph would we make? And then make a quick sketch of what that graph would be. Okay, we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, excellent. So not a huge amount of time because we're not actually trying to graph the actual data, but curious to hear sort of, do you think we can use some of those data to explore the question of when do cherry trees blossom? And if so, which data were you thinking about using and what kind of graph were you making? You can share in the Zoom chat or you can come off of mute, whichever works better for you. What kinds of graphs were we thinking about making? Okay. One that we often hear is, okay, well, we're going to look at time or like the year as one of our variables, and we will think about sort of flowering date as another variable, and then layering in the time period in there, or different things like that. Now, what I want to share is a couple things. First, that quick sketch, that sort of drawing out a quick sketch, is a great strategy to get kids to think about their predictions in the data before they jump in. So this is not really about visualizing, but it can really help down the road with students analyzing and interpreting data or making sense of the data, is if we actually have a sort of visual representation of what we think the data might show, and then compare that to the actual visual representation of the data, as opposed to often in our science or our social studies classes, we write out our hypotheses or our predictions of what we think we're going to see. And then that's in prose. And then we're asking students to kind of have a mental model of what that would look like in the data. So just as an aside, this visual hypothesis is a helpful strategy. But let's jump into this in terms of the visualizing the data piece. So the data set, you might have been wondering, what is the row number variable in the data set? Yeah, that's because this is about what I was showing you previously was about 21 rows of what is actually 799 rows of data. I would never hand that many rows of data to you as adults, let alone to my students, for them to look at. But when we use online graphing programs, we can do a couple different things. We can look at a larger number of data points all at one time to investigate our question. So let's say we're interested in looking at the year and we're interested in looking at the flowering date, and it's not plotting any data. So let me refresh and see if we can get it to plot the data in there, because gotta love when things don't work as you're running them on the fly, um, even when you've checked it previously. So let's try this again. Let's show our flowering date. There we go. Now we have data. So here we could look at this question of when do cherry trees blossom? And with one click, actually, we can already get into, oh, they happen sort of from the like 87th or so day of the year, all the way up to the 128th day in the year. I know these Julian days are sort of a funny thing to wrap your head around. We usually think about month and days. If we want to see if that's changed over time, then sure, we could add year. If we want to see if that has changed over time based on pre-industrial versus post-industrial, sure, we can add that in. Those are subsequent questions that we could ask about the data, or we could just go back to the actual flowering date of our data. We could look at it as a histogram. We could look at it as, we could add sort of our descriptive statistics to it, be it mean-based or for our students that are in middle school, we could add those box plots in. So just sort of want to highlight here, Data Classroom is awesome. I absolutely love it. I also love Tuva. I love CodeApp. There are great graphing programs out there, HHMI, Data Explorer, great graphing programs that are entirely developed around getting kids exploring the data and visualizing it, engaging with this visualization aspect of the data in real time so that they can spend the majority of their time kind of playing with exploring the data through those visuals, as opposed to the visual as the end product. So what we want to sort of showcase here is actively positioning visualize as a verb, where they're iterating, they're thinking about it, they're engaging with the visual so that they get comfortable with, oh, it might look similar or different, or oh, some of us might have thought of one way of looking at the data as a histogram, but some of the rest of us, other folks were thinking about it as it relates to our question as a line graph. And that's okay, right? We can think sort of normalizing this iterative nature, this playful nature when we visualize our data can be really helpful and impactful for bringing out more comfort around that actually making the visualization of the data. Now, are we going to do this every single time we are working with data that our students have collected or that others have collected? Goodness, no. We have so much other content that we need to be teaching in our courses. But it does offer an opportunity for our students to be in that driver's seat of making choices, but the lift is really low when we use or leverage some of these online graphing programs that are specifically designed to help students explore with the data. So what do I mean by this? There's a variety. Here are just some that I would share out. Excel and Google Sheets are fantastic spreadsheet programs that we have round peg squared hole to be graphing programs. All of these are built on a back-end algorithm of trying to guess what you want to do with your data. So Google Sheets is great. We have sort of round peg squared hold it, but it's not actually designed to help our novices do this exploration, visualization, change up the kinds of visual different components. And if we're trying to kind of build that muscle of, oh, what's the importance of our visual? How do we leverage that visualization as a tool in our sense making of our data, then using some of these other tools that are designed to explore, engage with the data a little bit more can be an option of a way to build out, up level our students' skills so that we move a little bit farther off of those bar charts. Okay. We can think about when I usually bring this up of like, okay, so if we're talking about tools, what does that mean? And I just share this out of like, in elementary, we should be mostly doing things by hands. And by high school, we should be mostly doing things on the computer. This aligns with brain development and understanding. It also aligns with abstract thinking versus concrete thinking. as we're going through those brain development transitions for our students and workforce readiness preparation. No employer is going to ask a student to make a graph by hand. That's just not a reality in the 21st century. And so we want to kind of meet students where they're at and keep pushing them as we are getting them ready to go off. And for those of us in the middle school, like everything else, we are the transition time in middle school as we keep going forward. So some strategies that we have talked about that are some options to consider are making those quick sketches or those visual hypotheses to help our students sort of have an apples to apples comparison rather than having them look at a word, think about what that would mean, and then look at the visual. And then varying the ways that we have students doing the visualization of the data, really making that an active verb as two strategies to sort of help our students, give our students some more practice, some more opportunities to make smarter choices about their visualizations so that they have more tools in their toolkit. That's really what we're going for. How do we build out the tools in their toolkit as they are working with their visualizations? Okay, so those are some strategies, but let's explore another strategy, which is how do we decide which graph type to use? Okay, that was great, Kristen. I saw you like clicking through, doing some different options. I came up with some other graph choices, but how do we actually get them to think about what graph type to use? And before we dive into some resources that I've got to share out and we can use and broaden this out to a broader conversation, I'd like to ask those of you two questions. Number one, what kind of graphs, charts, plots, maps do your students make right now? And how do they know which type to make? Okay, for those of you joining live, we're going to do this in the Zoom chat. So you can type in your responses. Number one, what kind of graphs do your students make? Number two, how do they know which kind to make? I'm going to stop talking for 30 seconds so that we can all add our responses into the Zoom chat, and then we'll come back together and sort of share out. I just encourage you to sort of type it in the chat and then hold off on releasing it out until we get done with the 30 seconds. Let's give everybody a chance to sort of type in their responses and get ready to share out. Okay, excellent, excellent. So seeing some line graphs, seeing some bar graphs, line graphs, bar graphs, these are common ones. I'm seeing they make these graphs because they're familiar with these types of graphs, which is a really common way that students are selecting what kind of graph visualizations that they are making, different things like that. There's also often a lot of like, we're just sort of short on time. And so we tell our students what kinds of graphs to make. No shame. I did this all the time. But we have to think about and step back of like, well, if we're always telling them what kind of graph type to make, then we've got a couple different things going on. So these were my guesses of what would come up. Bar, line, we've got some scatters that often show up, especially in our older grades. We've got some dot line plots that show up, especially in our younger grades. Sometimes pie charts get thrown into the mix, different things like that. But there's a pretty small number of graph types that we are pulling from, that our students are pulling from, that they are making pretty consistently throughout their K-12 experience. However, there are, in fact, 14 graph types, visualization types, that are either called out in our standards, K-12, so science, math, social studies, computer science, like explicitly called out by name, like In math, you need to learn how to make a box plot. Um, in science, we should be making line graphs, or they very commonly show up in media. So be that traditional print media or social media accounts and infographics or things that people are sharing, AKA our students need to be conversant with these 14 visualization types by the time they graduate high school. And really, there's a pretty small number that many of us are sharing are like, these are the graph types that our students are using sort of over and over and over again that they are coming back to. So how do we kind of help expand that out, recognizing it's not on any one of us to get all 14 into our curriculum, but over their trajectory, over the progression of K to 12, they're getting exposure to these 14. And then that, and how do they decide which one to make? Because oftentimes, and I was totally guilty of this, I would teach my students how to make a pie chart, but not when to use the pie chart. And it's not when to use piece that's really important and helpful for helping our students get beyond just always looking to us for what they should, type of graph type they should make, or defaulting to bar graphs, line graphs, regardless of what data they are actually looking at. So how do we do that? How do we help our students think about the when we use different graphs? Well, there's 3 kinds of questions that we're often asking with data in K to 12. It's not exhaustive, but almost all of our questions fall into this. Comparison questions, where we're comparing 2 or more groups. Are they similar? Are they different? Are they correlated? Distribution questions, where we're looking at the variability of a group. When do cherry trees blossom? Or composition questions, how long, or like looking at how the total is proportioned into different subgroups. Now, I don't know about you. My middle school students and even my undergrads could not tell me what kind of question they are asking, but they can talk about the data. And so I've added some describing words here as sort of a reminder of like, wait, what kind of question is this? Like, what would this look like? How would we talk about those data? And that is much easier for my middle school students and my undergrads. Because then this is important because then we can take us next step down, right? It's like we have more than 3 visualization types. So how do we go from 3 types of questions with our 14 visualization types? And how do these 2 square up? Because within each, we might be comparing among categories or among items, where we're thinking, are we looking at the red M&Ms, the blue M&Ms, or the green M&Ms? That is an item or a category. Or are we comparing between variables? So are we looking at the density of our M&Ms or things like that? Yes, absolutely. You can totally get copies of these slides and the recording will be made available. So are we comparing between variables? Are we looking at the, the mass of an M&M versus the diameter of an M&M? So there we're comparing mass and diameter. Those are 2 different variables of our M&Ms. Are we looking at the distribution within a variable? When do cherry trees blossom? Or are we looking at the distribution between variables? How shark encounters and ice cream sales differ, or are they correlated or similar, things like that. And what is the spread? What's the distribution there? Are we looking at a composition of something at one point in time? How did people vote in the election in 2024? That is one point in time, as opposed to the composition of how has the country voted over the last 12 election cycles. That would be sort of a change over time. We'd be looking at the composition of the country voting over time. So there are these different tiers down that we can then make and think about, and that's getting us closer to the kind of visualizations that we would want to be using. And this is important because then we can start laying on top of the structure of what kind of question are we asking and thinking about this next tier down of, okay, let's get a little more specific about that question. We can then line up are different 14 visualization types, and we are going to play around with that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open our shared slide right here. So you have two options. You can join in to the breakout room worksheet, or you can click on this other slide and make your own copy. So whichever you would like to do, you can jump in, make a copy to that visualization or to that slide deck. And then what you're going to see when you get in is you're going to see the slide that I was just sharing previously of our types of questions. And I put sort of the descriptor of those question types, the describing words, and then the sort of second tier down. I'm seeing this as items still, categories sort of makes more sense. So, and then the slide 3 is really the important one. So let me zoom out on the slide 3, because then you can see all these different visualization types here. Now, you might be thinking, but Kristen, I don't know what a bubble chart is. And I'd say, that's totally fine. Just leave the bubble chart on the side, okay? It's not trying to test your graph type knowledge. What it is just sort of doing is like, okay, bar charts. We said our students use bar charts. When would we use a bar chart? Do we use a bar chart to ask comparison type questions and then among items or categories or between variables? Do we use it when we're looking at a distribution within a variable or between variables, or when we're looking at composition? And just sort of thinking about like, when do we use that kind of graph type that you're familiar with to think about how it fits in and to the different types of questions, because we use different visualization types to help us explore different questions that we're asking. Okay, so you get to this through through our shared resource. Click on either the one for your breakout room, or you can make your own copy, and then you want to open it up and you want to sort of jump to slide 3 and do your own sort of adjusting and moving around of the visualizations of the different pieces. So we're going to take about 7 minutes or so to kind of play around, get in here, try this out as we are sort of thinking about our visualizations from this different perspective. Are there any questions before we sort of do this activity? Okay, great. Hearing none, go for it. So jump in to whichever worksheet you would like to play around with. I'll be here and we'll get going. We'll come back together in about 6-7 minutes to think about how was this experience of thinking about our visualizations from this perspective. Okay, excellent. So going through that process hopefully was helpful of thinking of what are the different pieces. Now, this might be what it looks like if you had more time and you were able to dive really far in. Now, what I want to share is that this is not about do you know the graph types? This is about thinking about our graph types in probably in different ways, or at least I'll use my I statement. Like, I did not think about graph types from this perspective until I was in graduate school working on my advanced degree in science. Like, because this wasn't how it was taught. Again, I was taught how to make the pie chart, and then I taught my students how to make the pie chart. I didn't think about necessarily like, oh, well, with a bar chart of our frequencies, or even for our elementaries or our means of our middle school and high schoolers as they're making out their bar charts, really what we're doing is we're just comparing across individual categories within our categorical variable, as opposed to our box plot is helping us really look at the distribution of all of our values that we might have. And so even more important than the like, where are all of the things, is thinking about how this lines up with those question types. Because again, we want to sort of help our students think about when we use different visualization types, not in a check, check, check box, because you might see some of these show up in multiple places. Our line graphs can show up here. We can think about them as like components of our distributions. Potentially, our scatter plots definitely show up in both places. Our stretched bar charts can show up here as a static in time or when we're comparing across variables. So it's not a dichotomous key of a yes, no, which is why the Google Sheets chart editor sometimes is like a little challenging because it's like, do this, and then it's like, or you could do these other things, and the or you could do these other things is just so wide open-ended that it oftentimes students default to the like what the Google chart editor shares with them, neither of which are really great ways of building their own muscles of thinking about which graph type we would use. But when we ground in what graph type we're using with what kind of question we're trying to ask, then we have a roadmap that we can use to start actively making those choices ourselves and build in our students the ability to make those choices ourselves. Now, I also want to share that there are 14 graph types, visualization types, that we want our students to know by the end of high school. Okay, so in high school, this is what it looks like in terms of the visualization types that we are using. But this is what it looks like when we're teaching in middle school. There are fewer visualization types that we are using and fewer things we are doing with our visualizations. And for all of you middle school teachers out there who feel like they just come to me not really knowing graph types, this is what it looks like in elementary school. And the answer is not push more graphing down into lower grades. It is really hone in and work on and solidify our graphing of those graph types at our lower grades so that we can build upon it in subsequent years, because graphing is actually additive as our students progress in their thinking. In the elementary ages, they are doing graphing that is very concrete and literal, like I went out and counted the pumpkins and I am making my graph, or good old, we're like coming into the season of candy bar charts of like what we get trick or treating, right? Like I physically can see that one-to-one relationship, and that's huge. That's really helpful. That's very on point developmentally for our elementary students. But as our students progress, similarly, like we want to progress in their exposure to technology, they can think more abstractly. They can consider things at bigger scales. Our middle school students can start to think in the aggregate. They can think of the data overall. So we want to be having them look at more distribution type visualizations stronger. And then even up into our high school, even more so that abstract nuance, pulling in multiple different pieces together, different avenues. And so using this structure of what are our questions and what kind of graph types might we use is a way to help our students start to build that skill. Now, this activity that we just did, you can absolutely access it. You can run it with your students as is, like we just did, or you can share the sort of final product of these are our visualization types. So let me pull it back up again. Let's see. Sorry, I like went over to a different screen, so let me pull it back up. So these are, let's say, our middle school visualization types. And if you're teaching middle school, you could print this out as a poster to have. It could go in a digital notebook. It could get printed and put in a physical notebook now that we're sort of bringing some of those back post the pandemic and wanting to get offline sometimes as a reference point. So when we're looking at a visualization that shows up in a lesson plan, a visualization that shows up in an article that we're reading, we can pause and have that moment of, why did they choose that box plot? Are they asking a distribution type question? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. So we're just reinforcing this. We use box plots when we're looking at distributions, when we're asking distribution types of questions. Sometimes the answer is no, and then it's a, is there maybe a reason why they didn't go with the convention, or might they have chosen a better graph type based on the kind of question that they were looking at, that they were pursuing? And so we can reinforce this graph choice skill from when our students are looking at visualizations others have made and when they're making their own visualizations as they are going through. So hopefully that sort of helps give some perspective, different things. I want to pause and give an opportunity for us to think about, okay, so if our graph types sort of build in complexity over time and we use different graph types for our different questions, like what might be a sort of takeaway, or what is something that is resonating for you from these different strategies that we have talked about in terms of how do we expose our students to graph choice? We have different visualizations that go with the different types of questions we're asking, thinking about how we make visualize data a verb, an active verb, and is it on pen and paper? Is it in Google Sheets? Is it an interactive? It is a combination of all three in any one of our classrooms at all times, but where are we creating space for that? And then sort of that opportunity to do those visual hypotheses. And for those that you are joining live, I encourage you either to sort of drop a comment in the Zoom chat, or you can jump right into the Google Doc and add a comment there. But just think about, like, what is a takeaway for you from this discussion that we have been having here today? Awesome, awesome. Okay, I'm seeing we're learning about the different graph types and has some questions on how we can introduce them. So we've got some strategies that we can try in terms of helping our students sort of think more differently, make smarter choices about the visualizations. And then we've got some questions of like, okay, so what are these visualizations? I just want to pause before, I'm not ignoring the question. I just want to pause quickly before we jump into that, like, okay, help, where do I get more support on that? To just remind us that we have been talking about one aspect of visual, or like two aspects of visualizing data. And there are many, many things that go in and play into our students making sense of and working with data. And so next month, we're actually going to be talking about describing and analyzing patterns and things like that. So like each month we've got a different theme, but I just kind of want to like norm set of like, yes, and there are a lot of other pieces, but what our visual is and how we're helping our students think of that visualization as a tool and something they can be actively driving and a part of, and that's an active part of the meaning making for them, can be really helpful. It's a really grounding component. So the strategies that you can try. So I hear some questions of like, so what do I do? Well, we've got some options. You can try these strategies on your own. You can also reach out to us with any questions that you have. You can join us next week. I'll explain a little bit more on how to join us next week to get more of your questions answered. And I also want to sort of shout out that we have a resource that you can jump in if you want to learn sort of more support around these 14 visualization types and really how to bring them to your students. And it's our Confusion to Clarity 3 Steps to Master Graphing. So this is an asynchronous course that we've designed so that you can do it on your own time, and where we sort of, the intention is to increase your confidence in knowing what each visualization type is. So if you are sitting there being like, what is a bubble chart? Oh my goodness, when do we actually use stacked area charts? We've got you covered. We like dive deep into each of these 14 ones, like what are they? Why do we use them? And then also sort of when would or could we use them in our teaching? Again, it's not on any one of us to do all of the different pieces for these 14, but thinking really strategically of when does it dovetail with the content that we are teaching and how to leverage that. And then we provide data sets to be able to practice making and iterating these different visualization types and thinking about them with different data sets in both Google Sheets and CodeApp. So CodeApp is like Data Classroom, which we were using earlier today. It's a free online data visualization program that again is set up all around exploring data. So very similar to Data Classroom, it just is entirely free. Now, with that, it means the features are not as user-friendly as, say, Data Classroom, because Data Classroom is on a freemium model. They're both fantastic. But for this course, we set it up to be in CodeApp so that you didn't need to purchase any other materials. So it's set up to be a 4-hour course, and then we've got a data organization structure checklist, because how our data comes in often influences how the visualization comes out. And we've got a couple other visualizations in there, because while there are 14 really common ones we need our students to know, there are other ones that pop up in our curriculum. You've got lifetime access, and if you jump in and you take a look at it and you don't like it, let us know. We will refund your money. So it's 2 payments or 1 payment, available anytime. You can do it at any time that works for you. So if you are someone that you're sitting there and you're like, I need more help, I want more help and more support, but I don't have the time right now to like jump into a really long webinar or workshop about this, I encourage you to check out the course. We've got folks that have been in it for the last 1.5 years and are deeply loving it. As we make updates to the course, they get pushed live to you whenever we make those updates. So I share that as a resource if you'd like to check it out. I just want to leave you with this, like, invite your students into the visualizing data. Let's make it an active verb. It's not a means to an end. It is a means to an end. That end is making sense of the data, not producing the product of the visualization. And that's really going to help our students elevate and up-level their visualization choices. So I'll take questions, but I just want to share one other thing, because next week at this same time, I'll be doing an Ask Me Anything about student graphing. So I'll take questions now, any questions that you have. You're always free to email me, and you can join us next week live. We'll be on our YouTube channel with an Ask Me Anything about any questions you have about student graphing. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wrap up and say thank you for our recording, and then I will stay on for those live to answer any questions that you might have. Look forward to seeing you at the Ask Me Anything next week. And if you happen to be at the CASE conference this coming weekend in Palm Springs, I'll see you there. Otherwise, join us at our Ask Me Anything next week. Next month, we're doing describing and analyzing patterns. Thank you for all that you do. I hope you have a wonderful day. Keep exploring. Have fun.